The first time Captain John Foley heard about the German Tiger tank, he thought it was a ghost story. It was late 1942, in a leaky tent somewhere west of El Alamein. A Soviet liaison officer, drunk on British whiskey and his own memories, described a monster that had appeared near Leningrad. A tank, he said, that shrugged off shells like rain and killed T-34s from over a mile away. Crews called it the Siberian Executioner. It needed 3 direct hits from a field gun just to make it stop. Everyone in the tent laughed. Soldiers always invented monsters to explain defeat. In the First World War, it had been flamethrowers and gas. Now, it was some mythical supertank. Foley laughed with them, but he did not forget. He could not afford to. His younger brother Michael had died in a Matilda 2 years earlier, burned alive in a tank that could not reverse fast enough under German fire. John had identified the body by the shape of a melted wristwatch they had both bought in Coventry before the war. Since then, every new German weapon was personal. Months later, in April 1943, standing in the turret of his Churchill tank near Jebel Jaffa in Tunisia, he realized the Russians had not been telling ghost stories at all. The monster was real, and it was driving straight toward him. The tiger appeared slowly at first, a dark shape on the far ridge. Then the light shifted, and it stepped fully into view. Foley felt the back of his neck tighten. It did not look like a tank. It looked like a bank vault on tracks. The hull was broad and flat, plates of armor joining at sharp, clean angles. The turret sat like a giant metal block, the front plate almost vertical, and from that block extended an impossibly long gun barrel that seemed to point at everything at once. Even at nearly 1,000 yards, the machine radiated confidence. It moved forward without hurry, as if it had never learned to be afraid of anything. Foley lowered his binoculars and let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. So, the stories were true. His gunner, Corporal Tom Davies, spoke without looking up from his sight. "That is not a Panzer IV, sir." "No," Foley said. "That is the one they have been swearing about in Moscow." The British had files on the Tiger by now. Grainy photographs from the Eastern Front. Sketches. Intelligence summaries that sounded more like complaints than reports. Front armor over 100 millimeters thick. Side armor nearly as strong as the best British frontal plates. An 88mm gun derived from the anti-aircraft piece that had already earned a reputation as the most feared cannon in Europe. The summary conclusion from Whitehall still echoed in Foley's mind. Direct frontal engagement with current British tanks is not recommended. The problem was that the Tiger was not reading British memoranda. It was not politely avoiding situations the War Office did not like. It was leading a German armored group down the valley straight toward the thin British line. 2 Panzer IVs followed behind it, with half-tracks carrying infantry in support. If that formation reached the British positions in strength, they would rip through the hastily prepared defenses and be into the artillery parks before sunset. Foley keyed his radio. His voice came out cooler than he felt. "All Baker Squadron, this is Baker 2. We have a Tiger tank. Repeat, Tiger tank. Bearing 270, range 900 yards and closing. Hold fire. Do not waste rounds on its front." Static answered him, then the clipped replies of other Churchill commanders acknowledging. Somewhere down the line, a younger officer could not help himself. "Sir, confirm Tiger?" "As in the big one." "As in the big one," Foley said. "Keep your heads in your distance." He switched channels. "Baker Actual, this is Baker 2. We need artillery on that valley. Now." The reply from Squadron Command was immediate and unhelpful. "Artillery is engaged on priority targets. Earliest support 15 minutes. 15 minutes. The Tiger would be on top of them in 5. For a moment, Foley considered the sensible option. Reverse out. Relocate. Let the tiger hit empty ground and hope someone behind with bigger guns stopped it. Then he saw his brother. Not literally, just a flash of memory. Michael, standing outside the Matilda in England, grinning, telling John that at least in a tank you could not run away and embarrass yourself. John had promised their mother he would look after the boy. 6 months later, Michael had burned to death inside 27 tons of British armour that some committee in London had declared was adequate. The Tiger continued its advance. The German commander stood half out of the turret, hands on the rim, scanning with binoculars. He did not bother using cover. He did not need to. In front, there was nothing in British service that could penetrate him at that range. Foley made his decision. "Driver," he said, "listen carefully, Peters. When I tell you, I want you to reverse us 20 feet. No more, no less, fast, then stop dead." "Yes, sir," Driver Peters said. There was the slightest tremor in the young man's voice. He was 19, from a garage in Manchester, and had never seen a tiger outside of a briefing photograph. "Gunner," Foley continued, "when we move, you will have a clear shot at his left side for maybe 3 seconds, maybe less. You will aim for the turret ring, the gap between the hull and the turret. That is the only place your 6-pounder has a chance." Davies finally looked up from his sight. "Sir, that is a target about the width of my hand at 200 yards. You once hit a moving truck tire at 500, Foley said. "This is easier. It is bigger and slower. We had 10 shots at the tire, sir. You have 1 shot at this," Foley said. "Then you will have the dubious privilege of receiving an 88mm shell in the face if you miss." Davies stared at the tiger. There was a beat of silence. "Understood," he said. "Loader, armor piercing." Sergeant Thompson, their loader, an older man from the last war who said little and swore often, rammed an armor-piercing round into the breech with a single practiced motion. "Ready." The tiger closed the distance. 800 yards, 700, 600. Foley made himself watch through his binoculars, even though every instinct screamed to duck inside and close the hatch. The tiger rocked slightly on its suspension as it crossed rough ground, but its turret remained rock-steady. The German commander in the cupola looked infuriatingly relaxed, as if leading a victory parade rather than an attack. 400 yards. Somewhere to Foley's left, an over-eager British crew could not stand it any longer. A Churchill fired, shell streaking out and smashing into the tiger's upper glacis plate. The impact produced a flash of sparks and a cloud of dust. When it cleared, the German tank continued forward, completely unharmed. The radio hissed with nervous voices. "Hold your bloody fire," Foley snapped. "You are only telling him where we are, 300 yards. The German commander finally seemed to decide that perhaps the British deserved to be killed properly. He dropped into the turret. The long 88 barrel began to traverse. 250 yards. "Now," Foley said. "Driver, reverse." Peters threw the Churchill into reverse. The tank lurched backward, scraping against the rocks that had been hiding it. For a brief, terrifying moment, the Churchill was fully exposed on the ridge. The tiger swung its gun toward them, but the huge turret moved with ponderous authority, not speed. 200 yards. "Gunner, you have it," Foley said quietly. Davies did not answer. His world had shrunk to a black cross in his sight where the turret met the hole. The gap that every instructor in Britain had told him bedtime stories about. The theoretical weak point that no one had ever actually hit under fire. He adjusted half a degree, leading the tiger by a fraction. Fired. The recoil slammed through the Churchill. The 6-pounder round crossed the gap between them in less than a heartbeat. Foley lost sight of it in the dust. For the tiniest of moments, Foley thought they had missed. The tiger kept moving, the turret still turning toward them. The 88 barrel was almost online. Then something changed. The Tiger's engine note, a deep mechanical growl that had been steady and confident, cracked. Smoke burst from the rear deck in a thick, dark plume. The tank's left track locked. It skidded, slewed to the side, and ground to a halt, half-turned, like a boxer taking a punch he had never trained for. The turret stopped moving. It did not blow up. It did not burst into flames. It just froze. Hatches flew open. The German crew poured out, dropping from the sides and sprinting toward the relative safety of a nearby wadi. One of them glanced back at the tank as if unable to believe he was leaving it. They did not even try to fight from it. Whatever that one British shell had done, every man inside knew the Tiger was no longer a weapon. It was a trap. The Panzer IVs behind saw their guardian angel wounded and made a cold calculation. Without the Tiger's armor shielding them, they would be easy targets. Both immediately backed away, disappearing behind the ridgeline. The half-tracks followed. Within minutes, the entire German thrust was gone, leaving the valley eerily quiet. In the Churchill, no one spoke. Davies was still staring down his sight, breathing hard. Thompson had another round half-loaded, waiting for the command that did not come. Peters had his hands death-white on the controls. Foley broke the silence. "Cease fire," he said. "No one else waste a shell. She is not dead, just broken." The radio burst into life. Half a dozen voices at once. "Baker 2, did you get it? Is it really a Tiger? How in God's name did a 6-pounder do that?" Foley ignored them. He was watching the Tiger now, not as a threat, but as something else entirely. He had seen knocked-out German tanks before. Burnt-out Panzer IIIs with their turrets blown off. Panzer IVs with holes punched clean through. This was different. The Tiger was intact. Its armor plates were unscarred except for a small, ugly mark near the turret ring where Davies' shell had gone in. It looked less like a destroyed tank and more like a machine that had simply stopped. To an engineer, that was far more interesting. Foley climbed out of the turret. The desert air hit him like a furnace, but he barely noticed. He jumped down from the Churchill and started walking toward the Tiger without waiting for orders. "Captain," Thompson called after him. "That gun might still be live. They could have left someone inside. If anyone is still in there after watching his mates run," Foley said over his shoulder, "he deserves a medal from Berlin." He kept walking. Up close, the Tiger was overwhelming. The armor plates were thicker than his forearm. The welds were perfect, smooth beads of metal as neat as anything he had seen in a peacetime factory. Every hatch, every handle, every hinge had a weight and solidity that British tanks simply did not have. There were no rough edges, no field modifications, no signs of desperate improvisation. This was not a weapon built in haste. It was a piece of industrial confidence. He put his hand on the side of the hull. The steel was hot from the sun and from whatever internal damage the shell had done. Under his palm, the tank felt alive in a way that disturbed him. He tried one of the side hatches. It opened easily. No one had bothered to lock it. The interior smell hit him first. Oil, cordite, hot metal, sweat, the universal scent of a tank that had just been in combat. But there was something else, a faint underlying odor of fresh paint and machine oil. This Tiger was new, very new. He climbed inside. The Germans had left in a hurry, but not in panic. Headphones still hung neatly from their hooks. A pair of gloves lay folded on the radio set. Someone had left a steel coffee mug half full on a small shelf, the liquid inside still faintly warm. On the back of the turret, chalked in neat German script, were words Foley could read well enough. Tiger 131. 2nd Company, 5th Battalion. The gun breech dominated the space, a massive block of steel that looked more like ship artillery than something that belonged on land. Every surface was clean, every tool was stowed, every cable was clipped in place. For a man who had grown up in Coventry, in and out of machine shops since he was 12, the interior of the Tiger was like walking into the future. British tanks worked. Mostly. They went where you pointed them, if the gearbox did not fail and the engine did not overheat. But they always felt like what they were. Slightly rushed compromises. This felt like a finished idea. Foley ran his fingers along a row of neatly marked controls. German labels. German logic. It was like reading the thought process of the man who had designed it. He found the entry point of Davy's round, a jagged hole just above the turret ring. The shell had not gone into the fighting compartment. It had smashed into the narrow space where the turret drive and some vital cables ran. He could see torn metal, shattered components. Somehow, by blind luck and a gunner's steady hand, they had hit the one place a 6-pounder could cripple a Tiger without killing it. He realized what that meant. If we can see this, so can London. Behind him, another man climbed into the turret. Major Charles Winthrop from Brigade Headquarters. Gray hair at his temples, neat mustache, the posture of a man who had been educated to give orders and never really stopped. "Is it as impressive as they say?" Winthrop asked quietly. "More," Foley said. "It is like comparing a watchmaker's piece to something we hammered together in a shed." Winthrop looked around the compartment. His eye fell on the shattered turret mechanism. "That your doing?" "Davies," Foley said. "Lucky shot." Winthrop nodded slowly. "Luck favors the prepared, Captain. You know what this is, do you not?" "A problem," Foley said. Winthrop shook his head. An opportunity. That afternoon, while the desert heat boiled the valley outside, a small war started that had nothing to do with Germans. American staff officers arrived by jeep, their uniforms dusty, but their eyes sharp. They had heard, through the unstoppable grapevine of frontline gossip, that the British had captured an intact Tiger. For engineers, that was not just a trophy, it was a once-in-a-war treasure. The senior American was Lieutenant Colonel Robert Harrison from the United States Army Ordnance Department. Tall, square-jawed, with the permanent squint of a man who had spent a lot of time in bright sun over proving grounds. He walked up to the tank as if it already belonged to him. "Captain Foley," he said briskly, "my congratulations on your capture. Now I will need you to arrange for this vehicle to be transferred to American custody. We will get it to our proving ground in Maryland. Our specialists are standing by." Foley blinked. "With respect, sir, that will not be possible." Harrison smiled thinly, the way men smile when they think they are about to win an argument they have already prepared in their heads. "I do not think you appreciate the scale of what we can do with this, Captain," he said. "We have resources you do not. Industrial engineers from every major manufacturer. Facilities built specifically for this kind of analysis. If we handle it, the whole Allied effort benefits." Winthrop stepped in before Foley could answer. "Colonel," he said calmly, "the captain appreciates quite a lot, including that this tank was captured by his crew in a British sector during a British-planned operation." "We are on the same side, Major," Harrison said. "This should not be a matter of national pride." "No," Winthrop agreed. "It should be a matter of who will get the most from it. And right now, British tanks are the ones facing these things in the field." Harrison's jaw tightened. He was not used to being told no. "Look," he said, "we are already working on heavy tank designs, Pershing, new guns. If we get that Tiger into our program, we can adjust our designs, improve them. That helps you too." Winthrop knew some of that was true. He also knew what Harrison would never say aloud. If the Americans took the Tiger to their own proving ground, They would control what information came back. They would decide what to share and when. Britain, already exhausted by years of war, would be the junior partner picking through whatever data Washington decided was safe and convenient to release. "You will certainly get your own Tiger," Major Winthrop said. "The Germans are obliging that way. But this one is going to Britain, orders from above." "Above who?" Harrison demanded. "Above both of us," Winthrop said. "General Alexander has already ruled. The tank goes on the next ship north." Foley watched the argument with a strange mix of irritation and dark amusement. 20 feet away sat the most dangerous tank in the world. On 3 sides of the horizon, German forces were still probing for weak spots. And here, 2 allies were fighting over who got to open the prize. In a twisted way, it reassured him. If they had the luxury to argue about custody, maybe the war was not lost yet. It took 16 hours to load the Tiger onto a transporter capable of moving 56 tons of German steel. It took another day to bring it to the port. The entire journey, a small escort of armored cars and infantry rode alongside, not to protect it from the Germans, but to make sure some overzealous pilot in the Royal Air Force did not mistake it for an enemy tank and bomb it on sight. On the dock, under blackout conditions, cranes groaned and cables strained as the Tiger was lowered into the hold of a freighter. Tarpaulins covered it. Official paperwork listed it as captured armored equipment, do not open. Only a handful of people in theater knew the Tiger reached Britain without a single German ever firing at it. The ship that carried it crossed the U-boat lanes under cover of bad weather and good luck, rolled into Liverpool under gray skies, and unloaded its cargo at night. Dock workers saw only a massive, tarped shape marked with a painted warning. Do not open except under direct War Office orders. Most assumed it was another batch of American trucks or perhaps a large gun. Only a small group of officers and engineers at the Fighting Vehicles Proving Establishment in Surrey knew what was actually under the canvas. On 9th of May, 1943, they found out. The Tiger sat in the center of a concrete test bay at Chobham, its desert dust still clinging to the tracks. Around it stood 15 men in overalls and uniforms, clipboards in hand. They were not soldiers, not in the way infantry or tank crews thought of the word. They were something the war needed just as badly. They were the people who had to understand why men lived or died inside machines. At their head stood Henry Merritt, the chief engineer from Vickers. 51 years old, spectacles, thinning hair, shoulders that had begun to stoop from years bent over drafting tables. He had never fired a tank gun in anger, but the vehicles he had helped design had gone into battle in France, the desert, and Russia. He carried every photograph of a burnt-out British tank like a personal accusation. Now he walked slowly around the Tiger, saying nothing. The first circuit was just looking. No measurements, no notes, just taking it in. The numbers in the intelligence reports had not prepared him for how it felt in the flesh. The Tiger dominated the test hall. Even the big American M3 Grant parked in the corner looked like a child's toy next to it. The armor plates had no rough edges, no crude weld beads. The Germans had machined the armor faces flat, then joined them with welds that looked almost ornamental. It was engineering with confidence bordering on arrogance. One of the younger engineers broke the silence. "Good God, Henry, look at the thickness on that front plate." Merritt laid his hand flat against the glacis. The steel felt cold, even in the enclosed hall. He tapped it with his knuckles and listened. 100 millimeters face-hardened, he said quietly. More in places. That is twice the thickness of the Churchill's frontal plate, and better quality. He moved to the side armor. 70, 80 millimeters. The places where British tanks hoped their enemies would aim, because at least there the gun might have a chance. On the Tiger, Even the weak armor was as strong as Britain's best. The turret front was worse. That massive block of steel, flat and unapologetic, carried armor so thick that if a British 6-pounder shell hit it dead on, most of the energy would go into deforming the shell, not the plate. He stepped back and looked at the silhouette again. Every British tank had compromises in its shape, rounding here, a weak angle there, places where an enemy shell could find an easy route in. The Tiger looked like someone had drawn a rectangle and then dared the world to argue. An officer in Royal Armored Corps uniform, Lieutenant Colonel Peter Ryle, watched Merritt's face. "Well?" Ryle asked. "Is it as bad as Moscow makes out?" Merritt answered without looking away from the tank. "No," he said. "It is worse. The Russians told us about the armor and the gun. They did not tell us what this thing does to morale." Ryle frowned. "We have fought heavy tanks before." "Not like this," Merritt said. "Before, there was always a chart somewhere that said, if you get within this range, with this gun, on this angle, you have a chance. Look at this." He walked along the hull and thumped the side again. "From the front, our 6-pounder might as well be throwing rocks. From the side, you need a perfect shot at close range. From the rear, perhaps. If you are lucky enough to ever see the rear of one." "So we build bigger guns," Ryle said. "Guns are not the only problem," Merritt replied. "We have not even opened it yet." He turned to the group. "Gentlemen, no more gawping. Cameras first, measurements second. No cutting, no drilling, no destructive tests until we have recorded every line and every angle. I want enough data that if this one is lost, we can rebuild it on paper." For the next 2 hours, they treated the Tiger like a crime scene. Photographers circled the tank, taking shots from every angle. Men with long steel rules and wooden templates measured armor angles, turret overhangs, hatch sizes. Stencils were laid over the plates to trace positions of weld seams. Someone chalked numbers on the armor, marking thickness estimates. Only when they were satisfied that they had captured the exterior did Merritt nod toward the side hatch. "All right," he said, "we have admired the outside. Let us see if they are as clever on the inside as they are on the outside." The hatch handle turned easily. The hinges swung with smooth resistance. No grinding, no play. German grease properly applied. Still doing its job months after leaving the factory. Merritt was not a small man, but he hesitated at the opening. For a moment, he was not an engineer. He was just a 51-year-old crawling into the belly of an enemy he knew could kill hundreds of British tank crews. Then he set his jaw, ducked, and climbed in. Inside, the first impression was organization. British tanks worked around whatever space was left after the gun, engine, and gearbox had been forced into the hull. The result, even in the best designs, was cramped chaos. Wires snaked through odd corners. Pipes brushed against knees. Tools were shoved wherever there was room. The Tiger was different. Cables ran in straight bundles, clipped neatly. Instruments were grouped logically around the driver and gunner. Each crew position had its own space, clearly defined. The floor was still a maze of mechanical housings, but every panel had been thought about. Someone behind Merritt let out a low whistle. "They did not build this in a hurry, did they?" "No," Merritt said. "This is their first attempt at doing everything properly without worrying about cost." He moved to the driver's position. The controls were familiar in principle, but better executed. Twin steering levers. Gear lever with clearly numbered positions. Pedals properly spaced. The Germans had even installed a spring-loaded footrest so the driver could brace under acceleration. He traced the wiring to the instrument panel, all neatly labeled in German script. Oil pressure, engine temperature, turret traverse, ammunition counters. He paused at that last one. They track how many rounds of each type they have fired from the gun in battle. Our lads have to remember it in their heads. He shifted to the gunner's seat. The sighting mechanism was a work of art. Fine adjustment wheels with almost no play, clear optics, graduations for range that matched the ballistics of the 88mm gun precisely. He put his eye to the sight. Through the glass, the far wall of the test hall snapped into focus as if it were 20 yards away. He could see the chipped paint on the bricks. Our gunners do not stand a chance at long range with what we give them, he said quietly. Behind the turret basket, the ammunition racks were laid out with brutal clarity. Thick shells, long brass cases, all stacked in orderly rows. Everything about the gun system said the same thing. Hit first, hit hard. Do not give the other man a second shot. It would have been easy to get lost in admiration. More than one British engineer did. For half an hour the hall was full of muttered phrases like, "ahead of us by 10 years, and we will never match this," and perhaps we were all fools to mock their obsession with engineering. Then Merritt reached the engine compartment, and everything changed. The Tiger's power plant sat in the rear hull, separated from the fighting compartment by a bulkhead. The team removed the engine deck plates with care, unfastening bolts and lifting the thick steel sections away with a small crane. Underneath, the Maybach engine gleamed in the artificial light. 12 cylinders, petrol, approximately 700 horsepower, more power than any British tank engine in service, compact for its output. Every surface clean, every hose properly clipped, every coupling tight. A young Leyland engineer could not help himself. "That is a thing of beauty," he said. Merritt did not answer immediately. He walked around the engine bay, looking not at the motor, but at everything around it. The pipework was dense. Cooling systems branched and branched again. Fuel lines snaked through tight gaps. The air intakes fed a maze of ducts. The wiring harness for the engine management ran into a tightly packed block of connectors. He peered closer at the fuel feed. His expression changed. "What is it?" Ryle asked from the edge of the bay. Merritt straightened up. "Gentlemen," he said, "we need to stop being impressed for a moment and start being practical. Look at this." They gathered around the engine bay. Merritt pointed with a grease-blackened finger. "This engine wants very particular fuel," he said. "High-octane petrol, clean, no contaminants. It wants attention. It wants filters changed, lines checked, tolerances maintained. It wants mechanics who know exactly what they are doing." He tapped the side of the compartment. "Now, picture this in Russia in January, or in Italy next year, or in Normandy when the RAF has bombed their railways to bits." He ran his hand along a long, exposed drive shaft. "This is not an engine for a desperate, losing war. This is an engine for a country that thinks it will always have the best of everything." An older mechanic snorted. "It is like putting a racing car engine in a lorry," he muttered. "Wonderful until it breaks. Then you are stuck on the hard shoulder for the rest of your life." Merritt smiled thinly. "Exactly." They moved next to the suspension. On the surface it was impressive. Massive interleaved road wheels spread the weight over a large area, giving the Tiger excellent cross-country performance. The track links were wide and heavy, providing good grip in mud and soft ground. But when they removed the outer row of wheels to look at the arrangement underneath, the room went quiet. The Germans had stacked the wheels in overlapping rows, 3 deep in places. It made for superb ride quality and spread the load efficiently. It also meant that to access a damaged inner wheel, you had to remove multiple outer ones. "How long does it take to change a wheel on this?" one of the British fitters asked. "Hours," Merritt said, "in a warm, dry workshop with proper tools." "And in the field?" the fitter asked. Merritt looked at the dense forest of steel discs. In the field, he said, if you get mud or ice packed between these, you are in trouble. If you get a damaged inner wheel, you are in trouble. And if you are the poor devil told to maintain this in Russia, you are very much in trouble. They moved forward into the transmission compartment, just behind the driver. Here was where the Tiger's soul lived. The Germans had put the gearbox and final drive at the front of the hull, linked to the engine at the rear by a long shaft. The transmission unit was huge, a complex multi-gear system with a steering mechanism integrated. It gave the Tiger 8 forward gears and 4 reverse. On paper, it was superb. In reality, the engineers could see the problem as soon as they opened the inspection covers. The gears were massive. The housing was thick. The tolerances were tight. Everything was heavily stressed. Merritt pointed at the gear teeth. "Look at the wear patterns," he said. "This tank has not driven very far. It was captured after a short fight in Tunisia, yes? But these gears are already showing signs of heavy loading. Tiny fractures here. He tapped with a small hammer. A faint change in tone confirmed what his eye had seen. "They built a transmission for a tank that is too heavy and too powerful," he said. "That gearbox is working right at the edge of what it can handle." Ryle frowned. "Can it be improved?" "Oh, certainly," Merritt said dryly. "By redesigning it completely with better materials and more time than Germany has left." One of the younger draftsmen, who had been sketching cross-sections as they worked, looked up. "So, which is it, Henry? Are they geniuses or idiots?" "Neither," Merritt said. "They are brilliant engineers who have forgotten that wars are not won with brilliance. They are won with enough. Enough tanks. Enough engines. Enough spare parts." He stepped back so everyone could see both engine and transmission at once. "Look at the whole picture," he said. "The armor is magnificent. The gun is deadly. The optics are superb. But the heart that moves all of this is fragile. The engine demands perfect fuel and constant care. The gearbox is working at its limits. The suspension is overcomplicated. They have built a thoroughbred racehorse and then sent it to haul carts through a swamp." Ryle folded his arms. "Can we break it on purpose?" he asked. Merritt nodded. "Yes. We need to know exactly how and where it fails." For the next weeks, they did something the Germans had not expected anyone to do. They drove the Tiger as if they did not care if it broke. They changed fluids, checked bolts, and then ran it hard on the Chobham test track. Over bumps, through mud, across deep ruts. They forced the driver to use every gear, to steer from full left to full right repeatedly, to reverse under power. The Tiger handled beautifully. On level ground, it felt unstoppable. The 88 spat shells with flat, terrifying trajectories. At speed, the suspension soaked up bumps that would have had a Churchill's crew bouncing off the roof. On the first day, one of the drivers climbed out with a reluctant grin. "If I did not know what they are using it for, sir," he said, "I would say this is the best tank I have ever driven." Then he saw the transmission oil. After 30 miles of hard use, the gearbox was already running hot. After 50 miles, there were tiny metallic flecks in the drained oil. After 80 miles, the engineers began to hear a faint whine at certain speeds. The steering became jerky. A week later, under a deliberately aggressive steering maneuver, there was a loud bang from the front of the hull and the Tiger ground to a halt. Everyone in the test hall froze. Merritt was the first to move. He did not ask if the driver was all right. He trusted that someone else would. He just wanted to get to the transmission access panel. When they pulled the cover, they saw what he had expected and dreaded. One of the main gears in the final drive assembly had lost several teeth. The broken steel fragments lay in the bottom of the housing like bullets. "There it is," Merritt said softly. "That is the weak point." They examined the metal under a microscope. The steel was good, but the loads were too high. The design concentrated stress in places the Germans had not fully accounted for. With perfect manufacturing and perfect maintenance, the final drive might last a while. With real roads, real dust, real shock loads, and real crew errors, it would die. Ryle stared down into the broken gearbox. "Can we exploit this?" he asked. "In more than one way," Merritt said. He took chalk and walked around to the front of the tank. "Gentlemen, most of our crews think of armor in simple terms: front thick, side thinner, rear weakest. That is not how this tank works." He drew a rough diagram on the Tiger's glasses. "The engine is at the rear," he said, "but the drive to the tracks is at the front. That means the final drive gears sit here. Low down, either side, these housings." He tapped the front corners of the hull where the track sprockets were. "If you can hit these with something strong enough, you do not have to kill the Tiger. You just have to cripple it. Break its teeth. Then it is a 56-ton pillbox." A young Royal Armored Corps captain, one of the liaison officers, frowned. "Our 6-pounders cannot penetrate that front plate," he said. "You do not need to," Merritt replied. "You need to hit low and from the side, here or here." He marked the places where the housing sat behind the armor. From the flank, a gun powerful enough might get in at this angle. From above, aircraft rockets might do it. And from very close, if you are mad enough to try, a well-placed shot could break the drive. Ryle folded his arms. "And if we cannot choose our angle?" "Then we choose our priorities," Merritt said. "We stop wasting shots on the turret front. We stop letting crews fire in panic at the thickest armor. We teach them that even a monster has bad joints." The mood in the hall shifted. An hour earlier, the Tiger had been an unkillable threat. Now, it was something else. Still dangerous, still deadly, but not a god. It had an enemy worse than British steel. It had its own design. That afternoon, Merritt sat alone at a desk in a small office off the main hall. On the table in front of him lay 3 sets of papers. The first was the initial intelligence report on the Tiger, mostly material from Soviet sources. Images of burnt tanks around Leningrad, range estimates, casualty figures, fear in typed form. The second was the day's test results. Armor measurements, gunnery observations, quality assessments. Pages that anyone in Berlin would have been proud to see. The third was the one that mattered. It contained only 3 sections. Armor and armament, superior to current British designs in most respects. Mobility, acceptable on good ground, poor reliability under extended load. High maintenance burden, vulnerable to fuel quality. Transmission and final drive, critical design weakness. High stress, limited life under field conditions. Vulnerable to shock and overload. At the bottom, he began to write recommendations. Do not attempt to match Tiger in quality. Impossible under current industrial conditions. Focus on quantity, reliability, and effective guns. Develop tactics that exploit Tiger's mechanical weakness. Aim to immobilize rather than destroy when necessary. Prioritize development and deployment of the 17-pounder gun. That last line was more than a technical note. It was a statement of intent. The 17-pounder existed already on paper and in a few prototype mounts. It was a long-barreled, high-velocity gun with enough power to threaten even the Tiger from the side at decent range. The problem was getting it into a tank without the whole machine becoming impractical. Putting it into a Churchill would require redesign. Putting it into a new British tank would take years they did not have. But there was another option. Across the Atlantic, American factories were producing Shermans in numbers that made British officers simultaneously grateful and slightly uneasy. The Sherman was reliable, easy to maintain, and good enough. It was also undergunned against a Tiger. Someone at Chobham, looking at those 3 piles of paper, began to sketch a solution. Take a Sherman, rip out its turret gun, and somehow shoehorn a 17-pounder into the space. It would be ugly. It would be cramped. It would be a compromise. It would also be the first Allied tank in the West that could face a Tiger and not feel like it was bringing a knife to a gunfight. Merritt did not know that the men who would work on that solution would later nickname their creation the Firefly. He did not know how many German tank commanders would curse that name in Normandy. What he knew, as he signed his name at the bottom of the report, was simpler. The Tiger was not invincible. It was a miracle built on a crack. And by understanding that crack better than the men who designed it, Britain might just turn German genius into German defeat. The report on the Tiger did not go to a filing cabinet. It went to the War Cabinet. A brown folder left Chobham in a locked dispatch case, traveled by staff car to London, and ended up on a polished table in a room deep inside the cabinet war rooms. Around that table, under yellow lights and behind maps covered in pins and string, Britain decided how to fight its wars. On that morning, the room was full. Chiefs of staff, intelligence officers, representatives from the Ministry of Supply, the Royal Armoured Corps, and the small overworked department that had to turn technical facts into strategy. Winston Churchill arrived late, as he often did, trailing cigar smoke and restless energy. He dropped into his chair, saw the Tiger folder among the papers, and tapped it with a fingertip. "So," he said, "this is the German feline that has been clawing at our Russian friends." Sir Alan Brooke, Chief of the Imperial General Staff, nodded. "Captured in Tunisia. Our people at the tank proving ground have been taking it apart." Churchill opened the folder. His eyes moved silently over the first page. Armor thicknesses, gun caliber, range tables. He did not waste time pretending he understood every technical detail. He looked for the sentence that mattered. Merritt had made sure it was easy to find. The Tiger tank represents a significant increase in enemy armor and firepower. However, analysis reveals critical weaknesses in mobility and mechanical reliability, particularly in the transmission and final drive. Under sustained operations, it is likely to become a liability to German forces. Churchill read it twice, then looked up. "In plain English," he said. "What does that mean?" The man who answered was Brigadier Robert Sandys, the liaison from Chobham. He had been at the test track when the Tiger's gearbox cracked itself open. "It means, Prime Minister," he said, "that they have built a tank that is too good for the war they are fighting." He stepped to a wall map where colored pins marked German panzer divisions across Europe. "They have put their best steel, their best engines, their best optics into a machine that is a marvel," he said. "But it breaks. It drinks fuel they will not have soon. It needs maintenance they cannot give it while you are bombing their factories and railways." Churchill frowned. "But it still kills our tanks." "It will," Sandys said. "Any Churchill or Sherman that tries to trade blows with it from the front will die. That will not change. But that is only half the story." He pointed to a diagram attached to the report. A cross-section of the Tiger's hull, the final drive gears shaded in red. "They have put a racehorse engine in a cart and then tied it to a delicate set of gears," he said. "We cannot match the Tiger in quality. We do not need to. We can beat it by making it fight on our terms instead of theirs." Churchill leaned back, studying the drawing. "Explain." Sandys kept it simple. "Do not try to out-Tiger the Tiger. We do not waste time and steel building a British version. Instead, we do 3 things. First, we get a gun into our own tanks that can hurt it from the flank. That is the 17-pounder. The work has already begun. We push it harder. Second, we change how we fight it. Our crews stop wasting shots on its thickest armor. They learn to aim low, at the corners where its drive sits, or to let it pass and hit it from the side and rear. Third, we keep doing what we are doing from the air. Every ton of bombs we drop on German railways and fuel plants also hits the Tiger, because it cannot reach the battlefield or stay there without perfect logistics. We cannot knock it out in one blow, he said, so we cut its tendons and take away its food instead. There was a pause. One of the air staff officers, a man with tired eyes and a voice that sounded like he had swallowed sand, spoke. Our fighter-bombers are already attacking German columns in France, he said. If we know their weak points, we can brief our Typhoon pilots to aim for those front corners, not just the middle mass. A rocket into the final drive will still immobilize it, even if it does not explode. Another voice, from the intelligence side, added a darker note. And on paper, he said, the Tiger is already a problem for them. It takes longer to build than 3 Panzer IVs put together. It uses more steel than we put into an entire Churchill. And now we know that after all that effort, the gearbox will rip itself apart if they push it too hard. He tapped the folder. Every Tiger that breaks down on the road to the front is not just a mechanical failure, Prime Minister. It is a waste of German resources they cannot replace. Churchill closed the folder and pinched the bridge of his nose. So, he said slowly, the conclusion is that we do not panic. We do not chase German showpieces. We stay boring and brutal, more tanks, simpler tanks, better guns, and an air force that makes sure their precious cats spend more time on railway sidings than on battlefields. Exactly, said Brooke. Churchill reached for his cigar. Then let us make sure, he said, that every British tank crew who sees one of these damned things knows 2 things. 1, that if he sits in front of it and duels like a gentleman, he will die. 2, that if he fights like a realist and uses his head, the Tiger can be turned into an abandoned monument to German vanity. He stood. Send the appropriate parts of this report to our friends in Washington and Moscow, he added. No need to mention quite how fragile we know it is. Just enough to keep them confident. The report went out. It traveled by courier to armored brigades, where instructors pinned diagrams of the Tiger to wooden boards and jabbed at the corners with sticks, telling young crews to aim low and from the side. It went across the Atlantic, where American officers read it, frowned, and began their own scramble to upgun their Shermans. It went, in careful summary form, to Soviet liaison officers, who nodded grimly and said they already knew the beast was stubborn but not immortal. But paper alone changed nothing. The real test of Merritt's conclusions came in combat. Normandy, July 1944. The Bocage country was a nightmare. High earth banks, thick hedgerows, narrow lanes that turned every engagement into an ambush. It was the sort of terrain where the Tiger should have been at its best. Short lines of sight, plenty of cover, lots of chances to put its 88 through the front of surprised Allied tanks. German commanders tried to use them that way. They rolled Tigers into shallow hull-down positions behind hedgerows, using them as giant traps. Allied crews who had not yet met one in battle talked bravely in staging areas, and then fell silent the first time they saw a Churchill or Sherman neatly opened from 800 yards away. The first days cost blood. Then something else began to appear in after-action reports from British and Canadian armored units. Brief, almost casual lines. Tiger immobilized by flank shot. Tiger observed abandoned, tracks intact, front drive damaged. Tiger crew seen blowing charges in turret before withdrawal. The Firefly began to arrive. It did not look like much. A Sherman with an absurdly long gun barrel that stuck out so far it seemed comical. The turret interior was cramped and awkward. The radio had been shoved into a box on the back. The loader cursed constantly at how little space he had, but the 17-pounder did what Merritt had promised on paper. From the side, it could punch through a Tiger at ranges where German crews had grown used to being safe. Even from moderate angles, the new gun forced German commanders to think about exposure in a way they had not needed to before. On one hedgerow track, a troop of Shermans blundered almost head-on into a Tiger. The first 2 rounds from the German gun turned the lead tank into a burning cage. In the old days, that would have been the end of it. Instead, the troop leader ordered smoke, reversed into cover, and sent his Firefly around through a side lane that recon had marked earlier. 10 minutes later, the Firefly's gunner, sweating and swearing as branches scraped the turret sides, saw the Tiger's flank between 2 trees. He did not aim at the turret front. He did not fire in panic at the massive hull plate. He aimed for the front corner, where they had been shown in training the final drive sat just behind the armor. His first shot hit low. From the hedgerow where the other Shermans watched, the Tiger's track jumped. The tank lurched. The turret swung, hunting for the new threat, but it never got a chance to fire. The second 17-pounder round went through the side plate into the fighting compartment. This time, when hatches flew open, there was no orderly evacuation. Flames took care of the rest. News of such actions traveled fast, not only among British crews but among German ones. In their own debriefings, surviving Tiger commanders began to say a phrase over and over. We were outranged. For years, they had been the hunters. Suddenly, on some days, in some sectors, they were the hunted. The Tiger still killed. It still commanded respect, but it no longer lived rent-free in Allied minds. The psychological shift was subtle but real. Before, a British tank officer who saw a Tiger might feel his stomach tighten and his hands sweat, even if his rational brain knew the odds. After Fireflies appeared and the reports from Chobham filtered into training, that same officer could look at the German heavy vehicle and think, if I can get my gun there at that angle, I have a chance. A chance is sometimes all that separates courage from fatalism. In Germany, men who had once boasted about their heavy tanks began quietly dreading the maintenance logs. On the Eastern Front, Tigers bogged down in spring mud destroyed their final drives, trying to haul themselves free. Crews cursed the same heavy armor that had once given them confidence. In Italy, breakdowns on mountain roads forced crews to abandon newly delivered Tigers without having fired a shot, blowing charges in the breeches to keep the guns from Allied hands. By late 1944, field reports from German maintenance units painted a consistent picture. More Tigers were being lost to mechanical failure and fuel shortages than to enemy fire. One after-action document from a German heavy tank battalion commander summed it up bluntly. The Tiger remains tactically superior to enemy tanks. Strategically, it is a burden. Our industry cannot sustain the losses. Our logistics cannot keep them supplied. For each Tiger we lose, we might have had 3 medium tanks which, taken together, would serve us better. That sentence could have been written by Merritt himself. In a quiet office at Chobham, months after that first test drive, he stood once more next to Tiger 131. It was no longer the terrifying unknown that had rolled into the test hall that first day. Its paint was scratched from countless demonstrations. Its engine had been repaired more than once. Its transmission had been opened, studied, and partially rebuilt for training purposes. It was a valuable teaching tool now, not a mystery. A young officer from a visiting armored regiment walked around it, running his hand along the armor as Foley had done back in Tunisia. He stopped near Merritt. "So this is the one," he said. "The famous 131. "This is the first one," Merritt said. "There are more now. Most of them do not work." The officer grinned. "I would not say that to the lads in Normandy, sir. They still get nervous when they hear those tracks." Merritt nodded slowly. "They should," he said. "Fear keeps you careful. But they should also remember something the Germans forgot." "What is that?" Merritt looked at the great steel machine, at the thick armor, the massive gun, the complex gears inside. "That a tank is not a statue," he said. It is not meant to sit on a poster and frighten people. It is meant to move and fight day after day. Any design that does not respect the grind of reality is just vanity in steel. The officer tilted his head. You almost sound sorry for it, sir. Merritt considered the thought. In a way, he was. As an engineer, he could not help but admire what the Germans had achieved. As a man who had seen too many photographs of young crews burned in machines that were not good enough, he had no sympathy for choices that sacrificed practicality for pride. I am not sorry, he said. I am grateful. This tank taught us exactly what we must never do. He rested his hand on the armor for a moment and felt nothing but cold metal. Out in the wider war, the consequences of that lesson were playing out. Allied factories continued to stamp out Shermans, Churchills, Cromwells by the hundreds. They were not beautiful. They were not perfect. They broke, they burned, they let men down. But there were always more. German factories struggled to produce each Tiger. Each one was a masterpiece. Each one demanded more of a shrinking pool of skilled labor, high-grade steel, and precision machines. In the final months of the war, as Allied armies crossed the Rhine and rolled into the heart of Germany, more than one advancing unit passed Tigers sitting silent by the roadside. Some had burnt out. Others sat with their turrets turned at odd angles, tracks intact, armor untouched. Their engines were dead. Their gearboxes were wrecked. Their fuel tanks were empty. No enemy shell had needed to penetrate their armor. A few of those hulks were examined by advancing British engineers. They found familiar patterns: cracked final drive gears, scorched clutches, shattered bearings. The same weaknesses Merritt had circled on a drawing back in 1943. Tiger 131 survived the war. It avoided the fate of so many of its brothers, not because it was stronger, but because it had fallen into enemy hands early and spent most of the conflict being studied instead of fighting. Decades later, painted and repaired, it would sit in a museum where visitors could climb stairs and look down at it from a balcony. Children would press their hands and faces to the glass, marveling at its size. Guides would tell stories about its armor, its gun, its crew. Most of those visitors would not know about the man in Surrey who had run his fingers over a broken gear and realized what that crack meant for a continent at war. They would not know that in a test hall filled with exhaust fumes and the sound of metal tools, Britain had quietly turned a symbol of German power into a case study in how not to build for a long war. But the men who had fought in 1944 and 1945, the ones who had faced tigers in hedgerows and on open fields and lived to talk about it, felt the result whether they knew its origin or not. When they saw a tiger burning from a flank hit, or sitting abandoned with its tracks intact, or blown up by its own crew after a breakdown, they felt something shift inside. The tiger was still dangerous, still deadly, still something you treated with respect. But it was no longer a monster. It was just another machine, and machines, no matter how impressive, could be broken.